I'm gonna tell you a little story, and it's something that is from my own experience, and I thought that I was going to need to do this at some point. Telling stories as illustrative examples, as fables or parables, seems to be necessary. In order to understand something, you need to relate it to something else that you can understand, and then draw parallels or inferences in your own mind between one and the other. Around 20 years ago or so, maybe it was 1999, I was working in a very big global computer manufacturing company. We didn't actually make the machines. We worked in a sort of a white collar, in inverted commas, office department. And as you might expect, this department was filled with managers and team leaders and assistant team leaders. Lucky for me, I guess, that I had managed to get myself promoted into a sort of a department that was inside a department that really had no chain of command, so I was out on my own. Those are the best kind of jobs to have. I either didn't really have a boss, or whoever he was probably in some other country, and I was out of sight and out of mind. Now, behind me would sit a large area of technicians in inverted commas, and these guys would answer phones, and irate customers would ring in, asking why their computer wasn't working in the way they expected it to. That was day in, day out, every minute of probably an 8 o'clock till 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the evening type job. Anyone who's ever worked in a call centre knows exactly the kind of things that happen there and exactly how soul-crushing it is. I was going to say that anybody who's ever worked in a call centre knows exactly what I'm talking about, but now I realise that anybody who works in a modern office is going to know what I'm talking about when I mention performance metrics, which are, on the face of it, supposed to measure the performance of each individual office member or staff member. In actuality, these things are usually very arbitrary and usually conflicting, and mostly very abstract concepts that can't really be measured in any meaningful way. And in fact, that last quality usually frustrates a lot of people because they feel like, no, I want to be measured more accurately, more smartly. But of course, that was never the intention. I mean, on the surface, yeah, for anyone who wants to believe the lie, these things are ostensibly to figure out who performs the best and therefore promote the best people. But I'm sorry to tell you that the better you are at your job, unfortunately, the more likely you are going to stay in that job. If you think about it, that's just basic common sense. And unless there's a very compelling reason why management want you to be on their side of the line, that's where you're going to stay. These so-called smart metrics are really just tools of management to be used to mentally subjugate those people underneath them. And by subjugate, I mean mentally dominate them and thereby control them. So this guy, he was working as a technician. I think he was fairly new. I think it's like actually starting a job as a soldier. Don't get me wrong, it's just a comparison. But there's a period of time in which you get adjusted to your new sort of reality. And for some people, that's a huge mental adjustment. And that adjustment, for a lot of people, really doesn't go well. And there is no real correlation between what kind of a man he is, what he looks like, how tough he is on the outside, how strong he is. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a correlation between somebody who's well able to cope with physical altercation, but doesn't know how to handle the kind of fights that happen in the mind. So anyway, it's pretty clear to me that this guy's getting bullied pretty hard by this guy who's an assistant team leader. And maybe a lot of people will agree with this. It seems to be that bullying is basically a mental thing. It's not so much a physical thing. The physical is just used to enforce a kind of mental domination over somebody. For all of us, there's kind of an initiation period. And there's, again, a military parallel to be drawn with this. There is a sort of a baptism of fire, or there's a breaking in period where gradually you go from the old paradigm of who you were, you get torn down, and you get built into somebody who's tougher, stronger in both physical, but more importantly, a mental sense. Because if you think your drill sergeant is tough on you, well then he's got to be, because he's preparing you for how tough it's going to be when you meet the enemy. And when you go through a period of starting a new job, no matter what it is, it's an unfamiliar environment. Everybody else seems to know what to do. It's all new to you. And so you actually are going to need somebody who will just tell you to be quiet and listen to what he's got to tell you because it's for your own good. You don't actually know what you're going to be facing when you start your job properly. And in most companies, believe it or not, the enemy is the customer. And it is going to be tough. So you have to pay attention. And I think part of the reason why during any of these initiation periods, the person who's trying to tell you what to do and what you're going to need to know is in a sense using bullying tactics to mentally dominate you, to make sure that the information flow is going from him to you and that your own ego isn't going to say, whoa, whoa, wait a minute now. I want to be the person who is in charge and I'm the clever one and I need to be telling him stuff. And that's the kind of thing I've seen a lot. And those guys are just wasting time. So there is a good aspect to bullying. And again, it comes back to what I always say is the motivations and intentions behind everything are what matters and what informs what you're doing and why you're doing it. There can be a useful purpose to something, to anything, and that's a theory for another time. But when something like this is going on every day, well beyond his training period, and even if you have no moral compunction about anybody being pretty much brought to tears and then telling you in confidence that he thinks he's going to kill himself, and it's pretty clear that the reason for this is because that guy is basically making his life a walking, living nightmare, then even if you've got no morals from a purely utilitarian point of view, if the object of the exercise here is to get this guy to be a functional and productive worker for the company who's earning his wages or at least creating some kind of useful purpose by sitting in the chair, then there comes a point that you have to say, if your method to achieve that is to constantly belittle this guy, your objective is not going to be met by continuing in the way that you are. So naturally, I felt sorry for this guy. I don't like to see anybody living in misery. After I'd spoken to him one day and said to him, listen, how did you feel there after a good night's sleep? Are you feeling any better? I hope you're not feeling like you want to kill yourself still. Haha, are you? You know, I'm trying not to be too morbid with the guy, and I'm trying not to put ideas in his head. I'm trying not to give him the idea that this is a thing that he should be thinking about. But he says to me again, no, his life just isn't worth living, and he can't take it anymore. So the phone rings, and he goes to pick it up, and I say, no, look, just leave it. I'll answer it, I'll deal with this customer, and then I'll get us a few minutes. Let's just go outside then. We get some fresh air, maybe we'll have a cigarette, we'll just calm down for a bit and just talk it out. So really the main point of going outside is just to remove him from the environment. When you can't cope and everything's swimming around you and you feel like this is the end and there's nowhere to go, well, there is. You leave that environment, you go somewhere else and you gather your thoughts. And I left him outside talking to a few other people and I went back in and I spoke to this guy who was making his life a misery, the assistant team leader. And I just very calmly and frankly said to him, I'd like to have a word with you for a moment. And he said, oh, about what? And I said, that guy there, you've pushed him close to suicide. Now, if he kills himself, I'm going to hold you personally responsible. But I don't want that to happen. I told him very calmly and looked him straight in the eye. And I said, there may not be any way that I can compel you to change your behavior towards him. But I said, if you don't stop what you're doing to make that guy's life so intolerable that he wants to kill himself, then I'm going to spend all my spare time finding ways to make your life miserable. Now, I can't actually remember exactly what he said, but I seem to remember he just looked at me for a very long time and then said something like, okay, I mean, I don't know why you care so much about him, like, you know. But I got the impression that the message was received. And I think the reason for that was because I knew that I meant what I said. I didn't know exactly how I was going to stop him, but I knew I was going to do it. Now, the next day, I walked past this technician's desk. I asked him how he was doing, and he smiled at me, and he said, great, yeah, it's amazing. I don't know why, but like, that guy, he hasn't said anything to me. He hasn't said a word to me all morning. And I thought, okay, wow, okay, this seems like it's working. And yeah, things got better for that guy. And he got on with his job, and I saw him doing it. He was able to talk on the phone. He wasn't paralyzed with fear. He wasn't like a kicked dog cowering under the table anymore. He came out of his shell. He seemed to make friends with other people around him. I saw him laughing and joking sometimes. So I thought, fantastic, job done. I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back here or anything, but I knew I did something good that day. Or did I? And here's the sting in the tail. So maybe about a year goes by, and I'm talking to this guy again, and I ask him, "How are you getting on?" And maybe I feel like, oh, he's like a little project of mine, you know? It's like a flower I planted, and I want to see is it growing, and, how's things been since I last saw it? And he says to me, yeah, things couldn't be better. He says things are going from strength to strength. And so much so, even, that he just got a promotion. And I said, wow, no way. What job did you get? And he said, oh, yeah, like I'm going to be an assistant team leader. Isn't it brilliant? And I said, wow, good God, well done. That is amazing. And he says, yeah, I know. Finally, I'll be able to get my own back. And I said, what? How do you mean get your own back? And he says, get my own back. And I said, do you mean against that guy that was bullying you? And he didn't say yes or no. He just kind of looked at me. And I said, because, like, that guy, he's no longer an ATL. He's now a team leader. So, like, you're still going to be underneath him, you know? And he says, ah, yeah, I know that. But I mean, I'm going to be able to get my own back now, finally. And I said, but, like, don't you know what I'm saying? You still can't do anything or say anything to him because he's still above you in the hierarchy. And he's still looking at me really puzzled. And he says, yeah, but I'll just get my own back though. And I'm saying to him, but how? How are you going to get your own back on him when he's still above you in the chain of command? And he's still just looking at me, and the best he can offer is, yeah, but like, I'll just get my own back on, the other people. And I say, what other people? Were there other ones that were bullying you as well? And he's looking at me like, I've got two heads. He clearly has no clue what I'm asking him. The questions mean nothing to him. And I said to him, do you mean the people who are going to be on the team that you're going to be the assistant team leader for? And he says, yeah, that's it. And he looks happy and delighted as if it's me. I'm finally getting the message, like that I've not been able to comprehend something blindingly obvious, but finally now I get it. And that makes him happy. And the true horror of this realization was dawning on me. And I said to him, the team you're going to be put on, do you know what team you'll be sent to? Do you know any of the guys who are going to be on that team? And he says, no, why? And I said, but then, I mean, how are you going to get any kind of feeling of retribution onto people who you don't even know who they are? And you don't even know what form that revenge is going to take, but you're going to take it on people and you don't even know who those people are going to be necessarily? And he just answers me back and he says, yeah, I'll get my own back. Finally, it'll be my turn. And like I've said before, perhaps I should just leave it there because you either get it or you don't. I don't know how many people there are left in the world who don't need the moral of that story explained to them, or at least don't need to be told why they need to feel horror and revulsion at that story and the implications of that story. I mean, at that time, I might have been naive enough to just think, all right, okay, thankfully it's just this guy who's got some kind of major mental impediment that just wasn't obvious to me before. And I'd like to think that I might have also made a mental note to perhaps get to know somebody a bit better before I go rescuing them from being bullied by somebody else. And that just maybe if I knew more about them, I might sort of say, you know what, they deserve it. Because if it wasn't happening to them, they wouldn't think it was wrong. If they were doing it to somebody else, they would think it was just fine. And unfortunately, to my absolute horror, again, I think I might be slow on the uptake. I have discovered that a lot of people who are very clever seem to think that principles only matter if they serve a function or a purpose for you. And worse than that, you don't even have to define very clearly what it is you're trying to achieve by using principles insofar as they suit your objective. I think there's a lot of people out there who don't understand what a principle is. And if they think they do, they think the principles not only can be discarded when they're inconvenient to you, but that in itself is a virtue to do that. It's being clever. And even worse than that, this is the main characteristic which they criticize about their enemies. They say that they have no standards or they have double standards. So, what I realized there, and I felt like that the ground was withdrawing away from me, like in those kind of zoom pan shots in horror movies, is that the best and the brightest of us not only don't understand innately what principles are, but when they are explained to them in a logical sense, they still don't get it. And if there's a lot of those people in the world these days, then we're in big trouble.